foremost, I'd like to welcome all of you to Intuit. I'm the Chief Data Officer for Intuit. My name is Ashok Srivastava. And it's a great privilege to be able to host you this evening. I've been looking forward to this evening, literally since Ravi mentioned it to me as a possibility that we could jointly host this event. AI in finance is something that I'm particularly impassioned about because, frankly, that's the name of the team essentially that I run. It's called Intuit AI, and the focus of the team is to build new technologies, new capabilities to help power prosperity around the world through the use of AI and through the use of data. And when we bring these two things together, we find that there's phenomenal adoption, phenomenal excitement from our customers because they can see the power that they have themselves through the use of artificial intelligence. I don't know if they know they're using AI. Frankly, I would rather that they not. But the results that they get, the benefits that they get are tremendous. And we see that through many, many different channels, through direct feedback, through indirect feedback, and other ways. So AI in finance is a big part of the charter of this entire company. Now, when we thought about creating this panel, we really wanted to create an exciting panel where we talked about different facets of AI in finance. And here you can see four very illustrious people who are going to be talking about some of the work that they're doing in AI in finance and some of their perspectives on that subject. But before we get to that, I really want to take a moment to welcome Ravi from the Hive and to give him a bit of an introduction because he always gives all of us such eloquent, such nice introductions. It's my turn to do that. So I've known Ravi for about 6 years so far as I recall. I'm an advisor for the Hive, and it's a wonderful place. If you have come there and if you've interacted with the teams of the people who are working there, you can see that they're really pushing the boundary of both business and technology. And I really feel that that comes from the leadership team there. I think Ravi has done an amazing job in not only building the Hive and building the companies within the Hive, but then also in creating a community across Silicon Valley and frankly, outside of Silicon Valley as well. I've really not seen that too often. It's a tremendous force within this area, and certainly a great friend and collaborator. So I want to welcome you, Ravi, particularly to Intuit, so that you can kick off this panel.
Thank you, Ashok. I should just stop saying anything, but anything I go after, say after this is going down. So thank you, Ashok, and thank you, Intuit, for hosting us. I'm especially pleased to see a lot of friends and colleagues and people that we have worked with here today. So today's event is being hosted by the Hive think tank. So I'll tell you more about the Hive. Hive is a venture capital fund. But what we do on the side is host a thought leadership forum. So it's focused around the use of data, the use of AI in different segments. And so you'll see kind of how the kind of speakers that we have. We've touched over 11,000 people, mostly here in the Bay Area. We do events every other week. And I'll give you an example of some of the events. Those are some of the tracks that you'll see our events happen under. So many of you came to an event that we did on 5G recently, Edge and 5G. And so you'll see sort of we tend to touch kind of the different tracks. Thank you to Intuit for sponsoring this event. And so you see we have a number of kind of key corporate sponsors who help make this happen. The Hive itself is a venture fund. Now, as many people here know, that there's abundant venture capital in Silicon Valley. So the two things that differentiate us, one is our focus around AI and using AI to disrupt the enterprise. The second is we're very early stage. So we typically are collaborating with entrepreneurs to help them start companies, fund the seed, Series A, Series B, and subsequently. So that early stage focus of co-creation, funding them, nurturing them to kind of give them escape velocity is what we do very uniquely. And we have a team, by the way, to support it. Mohan behind is our CTO with a kind of AI data science background, and we have a number of other colleagues who I don't see here, but who make this happen. So you see kind of the different thematic focus we have, a common set of technologies we use, focused on the general enterprise, but also a few industry segments, financial services, insurance, health, industrials, and those are the main things we do. And those are some of our companies. We were pleased to participate in Pinterest IPO recently. We are in lockup, so we don't celebrate right now, given what's happened to the unicorns recently. So the next event we are hosting is next Wednesday, and it's about insurance in this new era of mobility. So we see sort of car sharing happening, people, scooters being used in different cities. Soon we're going to see autonomous cars. So I hope you can join us and learn more about how insurance products are going to change. The event after that is one of the speakers is a mutual friend of Ashok and ours, Evangelos. Evangelos Simuadis, is that the right pronunciation? Yes. Who's going to be speaking along with a Stanford faculty member on how the auto industry is transforming. So it's going to be a lot about software, data, and AI. So if you're interested in autonomous navigation, how the whole supply chain is changing, come on over. One event that we don't have posted yet is it's going to be a very different type of event. It's going to be by a woman called Esther Gokhale, and it's on back pain. What's the common problem that this audience has? and on our computers. So that's going to be the only event we do in August, because after that we'll take a little bit of a break. And so we are very excited to be hosting this event with Intuit, and thank you again for doing it. And so what I think we'll do is have the panel discussion first, and subsequently kind of the Q&A. So just hold your questions, but we really encourage you to ask questions. If you're on Twitter, use the hashtag #HiveData, and so that other people can follow the conversation. With that, I'd like to introduce Gargi Ray. Gargi is the VP of Finance, Global Revenue Controller for Infosys, and we've done a number of other workshops, CFO workshops with her. So it's a great pleasure to introduce you. And I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ravi, and thanks for giving this opportunity to come here. And good evening, everybody. It's a beautiful day and a beautiful campus. So, and we are really fortunate to get this view. So thank you, Ashok, and the entire Intuit team for hosting us here. We have great panelists with us for this great, exciting evening. We have Matt to my left. He's from Deloitte Consulting. To my right, immediate right, we have Jerry from Intuit. He's the VP controller, and we have Amir from ServiceNow, who was originally the controller and now moved to a business unit. So, Matt, would you like to talk a little bit about your role and your background, and then move on to you individually give your background?
Sure. Sorry about that. So my name is Matt Soderberg. I lead our finance operations excellence market offering inside of Deloitte. So if you think about that, that's the order to cash, procure to pay, close, consolidate, optimization, kind of that process-driven work. So I lead our market offering for that. And about 4 years ago, I built I was one of the founders of what we call finance in a digital world, which is the concept that Deloitte uses to encapsulate digital finance, so taking finance more digital, and also the other piece of that, which is finance as a service provider to new businesses, and how do we get finance fit and ready to support new business models like consumption-based billing and those sorts of new business models that companies are having to undertake to keep up.
Thanks, Matt.
Hi, I'm Jerry Natoli. I am not the controller. The controller over here, he would tell you that. I am VP of Corporate Finance. I'm also the treasurer. I lead corporate financial planning and analysis, investor relations, and I've got a business intelligence team with me as well as we think about KPIs across the company, automating some of the data that flows through the finance systems and making sure that we've got our arms around both the business and the financials. That comes from my team. I've been with Intuit about almost 15 years. Before that, I was with a small startup. Before that, with Hewlett Packard. The efforts around data in the company that Ashok is leading are huge. We think it's really critical to our customers, as he described. If you think about how that flows through the finance shop, both through the controllership, through FP&A, through business model reinvention, and how it helps us make decisions faster and better with more clarity and resolution. That's all of what we're trying to do, so we'll cover that in a bit.
Thanks, Jerry.
Hey everyone, my name is Amir. I was the corporate controller, the government controller for ServiceNow, led the functions from accounting, source to settle, payroll. While at ServiceNow, in terms of leveraging our platform, we had a chance to build a set of solutions that are geared towards the office of the CFO. I had the good fortune of moving into that role to lead the product offering in the business unit.
Thank you everybody. So today's topic, as you all know, is basically how finance transformation is being digitally powered. Now, before we even begin this topic, first we need to agree that why do we need finance transformation? Because I presume that most of us are here from finance background, and it's really important to us that we as stakeholders and at various companies have to convince our management, our teams, that why do we need this transformation? So we need to agree ourselves that do we really need this transformation? And that's the first thing that we would like to have the views on. So Matt, coming over to you, you've kind of helped a lot of clients, traverse through this journey of digital transformation. So would you like to share a little bit of triggers as to how the companies, what are the triggers that have led to digital transformation within the organizations?
So I think there are a lot of triggers. I think there's kind of two things as we start to talk to our clients. One is there's the operational piece, which to me, that needs to be as touchless as possible. If you think about the operational side of finance, really what you're trying to do is make sure that when a dollar comes in, that it flows correctly and you're able to validate that dollar is in the right place for the right reasons. The other piece is really around decision support. And so how do you get the data at the right place at the right time to leverage it to make the right decisions, not just historically, but going forward? And how do you partner with the business more effectively to give them that right information so that you are pulling triggers correctly to move forward? So I think those are the two real triggers. I think there's going to be, if we look out 7 to 10 years, I think there's going to be a push on that back office to minimize the cost there. And I don't want to say it has to go to zero, but when I try to challenge my clients, I would say, why are there people touching those back office systems? Like why these days? I understood it 10 years ago, I understood it 20 years ago. There's really no reason today with the capabilities that exist. Why are you touching it? So why do you have a huge back office shared services type of organization? On the other side, that doesn't mean that there are less people in finance, by the way, because those people, not the same people, but that time and effort ought to be directed at how do you continue to work with your business partners to make much better business decisions. And that's what finance ought to be about. And so we're not saying that there's a reduction in finance necessarily. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But we are saying there's a shift from a lot of people sitting in that back office space to how do we really get the right data to the right people at the right time to make business. And those business cycles are speeding up drastically. So that means the finance has to speed up, the data has to speed up, the data needs to be there ready to deal with it. And what happens is when we go into our clients, they're not there. They're not there in the back office, and therefore the there's delays in data, there's data latency, they're not able to move quick enough. I mean, how long does your close take? Is anybody on a real-time close? No. The question is, why not? Why not? Why? I mean, we're able to go get our bank accounts. We're able to go do those types of things. Why aren't we able to see that from a corporate systems perspective? And so that's a bit of the challenge is when people want to move at that speed. Right now, finance and the supporting systems behind that, they're not ready. They're not there.
Thanks, Matt. So today we are saying that finance need not be only ready for the businesses that we see today. We have to remain agile and we have to really scale for businesses that are coming. So the agility and the speed of doing things is of utmost importance. So Jerry, you've taken your company in the transformational journey. So while Matt has shared from a consulting perspective, from a user perspective, what do you think were the real triggers, whether from a good to have transformation to a need to have transformation? Because then, from a user, we always evaluate that, right? Which we don't do from a consulting perspective. Consultants would always tell us what is the best thing to do, but we as users need to really evaluate that what are those real pressing points. So would you like to share your journey on that?
Sure. So I joined Intuit about 15 years ago as the finance director for QuickBooks Desktop. And the desktop for QuickBooks, sold primarily through retail, was the hub around which most of the company's business revolved. TurboTax had a similar offering, desktop-based, that was really the crux of the revenue. With the shift from desktop to online, the expectations around how often you needed to understand how the business was doing, what metrics to use to actually measure performance, the expectations from the business leaders and ourselves as well match what the customers are seeing. So if you're a customer and using an online offering, you expect it to be available, fast response time, complete. If the GM comes and says, well, how did we do last week? And I say, I don't know, I don't have the file from retail yet. I'll get it next Saturday. That's actually not nearly good enough.
Right.
And so what we really had to engineer is, while the desktop businesses have remained important for Intuit, the online businesses are driving the growth. What are the right metrics for those businesses, the SaaS type metrics? How do we understand how we're doing on a daily, sometimes by minute basis relative to customer interaction with our offerings? What are the implications for which channels are performing well, and how do we move our marketing dollars around on the web and through the direct channel? What are the implications for the pricing promotions that we're running? What are the implications on just overall spend? So we'll close in 3 days, so it's not instant.
That's great.
But what's happening the last week of the month before we close, and if I've got dollars available to hire more engineers to go build something cool, that's the question I'll get from the technology team, and that's the question that's actually still hard to answer, is literally, where are you relative to where you think you should be on a daily, weekly basis?
And sometimes you also have to evaluate what's the cost of a real-time close, right? So the provisionings that you make, how accurate those are. Are you actually foregoing some events on the last day for a real-time close also, or maybe because you have to really work minus days to get a real-time close. Like at least you have to work like minus 3 days to make sure that all your accruals and all those provisionings are there to have a real-time on the day close. So that's interesting, because as users, even when we do our we have a 2-day revenue closure cycle for the entire company, and we kind of have to pretty much do it on the dot. So it's not a real-time close, but we have a total about a 4 days closure cycle. So we know the challenges, and we always have to calibrate between if you do a real-time close, what are the accruals that you have to do beforehand. So this interesting thing, what keeps me thinking is that what is that we see from a future of a CFO function as a finance function, say 5 to 10 years now from the horizon? Will our critical functions change? Will our roles change? So the way we see is that the essential function for us to be the custodian of the assets, the custodian of accurate reporting, that is definitely the bread and butter. That will not change. But what will change is the ways and means we perform. And what will definitely change is our roles expanding, and which has already changed, being a strategic advisor and a catalyst of change, right? So Amir, would be interesting to get your views, because you are in a company which is helping the customers being agile and transforming the experience every day. That how do you see the future of a CFO function transforming, and what are your takes on that?
Absolutely. So we obviously constantly talk about the office of the CFO being more strategic. I'm sure that Gary's organization has a desire to be more strategic, just like we talked about. But what's missing is something different, in our opinion. So a lot of the conversation today is around the flow of data, how we do things with data in terms of delivering it. At ServiceNow, we look at it as the entire spectrum. How do we just get information delivered from an employee perspective? How do we get better notifications? The whole concept that none of us were educated to come to work to send emails on a daily basis, and yet that's what we do for the majority of our life. How do we leverage platforms like ServiceNow to automate a lot of those functions so that we can truly become more strategic? Because we do have a desire to give answers to the business. It's really where our actual, I would say, our expertise lies in. It's just untapped today. So where we come at it is, for years now, we've said that the desire for finance is to become more strategic. We look at, well, let us, as ServiceNow as an example, let us drive a user interface that's far more modern. Think about the things that Intuit's done. They've taken all of us and turned us into tax accountants, even though we never could. And it's because of the process and the experience layer that they drove. Well, from an enterprise perspective, we want to do the same. We want to drive the user experience layer. We want to be far more intelligent in terms of how we deliver data, and then drive a system of connection. Because even to Jerry's point, if they're closing in 3 days, I suspect, given Intuit's size, there's groups in multiple locations. And the connective layer that we're missing today is the ability to see where everybody's at. That's where ServiceNow wants to come in and again drive that through what we do, whether it's from an intelligent task management system, whether it's through workflows. That allows us to become far more what we want to be, this whole concept of being more strategic value add to our organizations from a finance perspective.
Right. So what keeps us, what are the tools that we have today that have enabled and are constantly enabling us to do this exponential finance digital transformation? So today we're going to talk about some of the digital assets that we have. It is like the cloud, the robotic process automation, the AI-enabled analytics, and blockchain. So we will first start with our cloud. Now cloud, as we've all seen, that it requires a very less investment, it's scalable, but it has its own risks and apprehensions. So I would request Matt to share some of the, the experiences and which are the type of areas where finance has embraced cloud, and what are the apprehensions that the clients have seen around embracing cloud in their core functionalities.
So I will say that I think we've seen cloud now in finance almost everywhere. So I'll start with a bit of the apprehension, because I think that's probably the biggest hurdle. And I think it all comes back to security. There are other concerns that I'll get to in a minute, but it always starts with security. I actually had this argument or debate, and I say argument, this debate with somebody about security about 4 years ago. They went through the whole process. This was a security company. They went through the whole process of proving out that the cloud provider's security was actually better than their security as a security firm. And so to me, that kind of put it to bed, right? But I will tell you, I was at a doing a CPE seminar at a big auto company 2 weeks ago, and they said, we will never go to cloud because of the security issues. And I said, well, do you use Salesforce? And they said, yes. I said, so let me get this straight. You put your customer information and every touch point that you have in the cloud, but you won't put your financial results. The answer was yes. Like somehow they get comfortable with that and not the financial results. And so to me, I think that whether it's real or perceived, I think that's the number one concern. I think after that, there are other concerns. It's how do you integrate and integrate effectively? It's how does it fit into my architecture? One of the big debates we're seeing now is the CapEx versus OpEx of cloud versus on-prem, and how do I message that to my shareholders, and what does that mean? So I think there are roadblocks. I would say a lot of those roadblocks can be overcome. There is still a religious debate about the technology piece of it. The other parts are all things that can be overcome and you can kind of logically get through. There is a fear or a religious debate about the technology piece of that. That said, we've seen a big pickup in cloud from an ERP perspective. We've seen cloud in the FP&A space. We've seen cloud from our treasury systems. We've seen cloud a little bit of everywhere. So I don't know that there's some place where we would say cloud hasn't been used. So I think if you look at finance kind of end to end, we've seen cloud be used in most of the aspects of that. But I will tell you that it's still an ongoing debate and discussion, and there are a lot of these conversations, and some companies are much more willing to do it than others. And so we're still seeing a pretty wide extreme of or wide band of where somebody, companies that will accept it and companies that won't.
Thanks, Matt. And Amir, how are you seeing, because ServiceNow is predominantly on the cloud, right? So how comfortable are clients using on the cloud data, which is like pretty much, what is the level of comfort that you're seeing, or what are the things that you're seeing in your client base?
Well, for our client base, it's fairly diverse. We obviously serve customers from the U.S. and all the other sectors in terms of what we share publicly. This notion of the cloud, again, 10 years ago was obviously the big discussion, is not mentioned, not so much today. Again, what we want to be able to do from an automation perspective, from a user experience perspective, that's only something that we could deliver via the SaaS type offering that ServiceNow and other companies provide. It is not going to happen via the legacy technologies. And so cloud is going to be a natural migration. It's not, there's not a surprise as to why companies like ServiceNow or Salesforce have been successful in what they're doing. It's because of the value that they're able to drive and deliver to the organization as to why they make that migration to the cloud.
Right. So moving over to the next one, which we have seen, robotic process automation, which is RPA. We've seen that fundamentally many of the manufacturing processes undergoing a change, and even in simple process of procure to pay or order to cash, we've seen these being automated at various cycles using the robotic process automation. We in fact in our company have adopted robotic process automation for invoice automation. But there were challenges. When we adopted it, we saw that the unstructured data, which is required, say, for invoice verification, could not be adopted and could not be verified so seamlessly. If it's only a pure repetitive task, which is like step A, B, C, which really doesn't require a manual or a human intervention or verification, that could be easily done by an RPA. But when it came to, say, an example of reading an email and understanding whether the customer has really approved this milestone, like we are in the service industry, so whether they have approved this milestone, that reading and that decision making was really not very much capable when we started with RPA. Those have been built in now. So we have seen RPA, the use of RPA, and Jerry, I would like your views as to how do you see RPA shaping up, the use of RPA shaping up in Intuit and in the broader horizon?
Sure, so we see it as a huge opportunity. The data challenge and the process simplification challenge that precedes deploying RPA is real. So data in one source system might be cloud or not is one aspect, but if you are depending on data that's stitched from several source systems into a somewhat coherent whole, and that's what you're relying upon, making that available and structured and governed in a way that you can actually use it for analysis and apply some of the process automation to it. That's where the investment lies for us. We have formed a relatively small team about a year and a half ago to begin experimenting with robotic process automation, primarily in the order to cash, accounts receivable, and some of the finance operations areas. It's been dramatic. And the two aspects that really help with is before you automate, you need to really assess the process and simplify, and that's been very helpful. But then once you've got it simple, can you deploy the tool and then garner those savings and roll into the next effort and the next effort and the next effort? It's really been dramatic. And so we've got 5 major priorities across our finance team for this coming year, and simplification and robotics process automation is one of them. I think 3 of the other 5 or 3 of the other 4 are data related. So this is all right. The conversation and the really the oil, the new oil. I guess that's what everybody's calling it. That companies and including finance organizations are born if they're not already running on them today.
Right. And Matt, how have you seen your clients embracing RPA, because it's like been there for quite a while, and which are the areas and which industries in finance which have actually embraced it more?
So I'll start with, I have to agree with what the other panelists said. I actually, and this cannot be published anywhere, but I used to call RPA bots the dumb bots, because that's all they can do. It's less than, greater than, equal to, it's yes, no's, right? And so to me, what I've seen the evolution become is you have to apply the AI along with the bots to add some level of intelligence to those bots. And so we actually call it intelligent automation instead of RPA or AI. We actually bring that together and call it intelligent automation, because because I really do, like, it really does add the intelligence. If you think about, to your point, now they've built in some of the capabilities, but, some of the natural language, some of the natural language that was required in the early bots to work with that, we used that very early and read big, long contracts at banks that then were able to call out the data, put the data into the bot, and then the bot could run the do these match or do these not match, and what's the risk. But you had to get that out of individually written contracts with customers. So we kind of realized early on, because the first industry that really leveraged it was banking. Banking moved really fast. They were under pressure from all the fintech that was occurring, so the banks moved first. It's actually the first time I've seen high tech not be one of the first movers. And so high tech and some of the other industries, healthcare, they kind of came up after the finance. And then I would say, consumer, manufacturing, those are lagging a little bit. So it was the first time that I've seen high tech not lead. And at that, if you think about kind of the timing of that, the banks were under pressure because they were having to do a bunch of the CCAR, they were having to do all these contracts, they had all the new regulations, they had to find some way to do that, and putting people on the ground to do that was not an option. And they started that way and just realized it wasn't sustainable. So they had to figure out a way to sustain it, so they were very, very, very early adopters of RPA and cognitive, working with the bots to do that.
Right. And Amir, how have you seen the RPAs being integrated with your platform? Because RPAs is like, again, specific functionalities which get addressed by RPAs, and yours is a platform servicing different user capabilities and functionalities. So how have you seen those integrations? Are those seamless, and what's your experience?
So we take RPA to a different notion. We say that there's going to be an evolution of RPA, and to Matt's point, this whole notion of IPA, we do it via real-time integrations, and then we really allow the ServiceNow platform, and for us, our finance product offering specifically, to help drive a lot of the tasks, and in essence, the things that we as humans do today manually, the ServiceNow platform does for you automatically. We just define that as a whole notion of the spectrum of your intelligence, not so much just tagging it as RPA or IPA. But what we look at is if you have the ability to have real-time integration, which is very hard to do, doesn't exist in the enterprise today. As Jerry mentioned, it's this ability for us to know as a system how to post or transact things in other solutions. That is what we leverage via our real-time integrations. That's what we do in the platform. That's how we get you to a faster planning cycle, a faster flow cycle. It's by leveraging that type of process automation.
Right. So moving on, we've also seen visualizing taking quite a bit of role in today's representation of data to management in the finance forte. Like personally, we have seen the way we have utilized Tableau or Power BI to show the traditional reports that we used to show on tabular form. It's much more onerous for interpretation. Today, when we see the same stuff in graphical structures, or we can actually click the dashboard and see the data for ourselves, it becomes much more meaningful and we can drill down immediately. So visualization is again, through dashboards, has been one of the different tools that we have seen in the current thing. Like we are moving, we are not really leaving Excel still. As users, we can't say we've really left Excel. We've kind of built on top of Excel to see what are the things. And again, Matt, how have you seen visualization affecting the finance representation?
So I think there's probably two pieces. I think visualization's huge for a variety of reasons. Like it just makes consumption of data different. I think the challenge to it is the question of what it took to get there. And so I always have this debate with my clients on, okay, great, you've visualized it, but there's a process that my analysts usually go through to create it that then creates the understanding. And so what we've actually seen happen is it actually requires your analysts to build a new skill set, and it becomes a bit of a talent conversation, because instead of saying, I'm the Excel jockey and I have to go in and I have to manipulate and I have to know and I have to own, and as a result I know every single thing about that, what happens is you use Tableau, and now you've got to drill and you've got to figure out how to tell a story from that data, and you have to understand how to mine that data appropriately. And so it actually changes the skill set that's required for an analyst who's using it to be really successful and to tell the story around it.
You're right. So visualization is definitely catching up, and Amir, we would like to understand your platform's role in visualization, because it's all about the modern experience, and how has visualization played a key role?
So visualization is going to be an important element. We'd like to take it from the perspective of there's accountants in the room, if there's people who understand finance, the visualization of something like a flux report or the ability to provide commentary, that's super helpful. And how do you do it easily and efficiently? So that by itself, the visualization layer is great. But again, where we need to take it to is where you're not having to all tap between 20 systems, which is what we all do. We need to be able to, in essence, look at a visualization layer and then perform the work that we humans would do to post a journal entry or to do something along with a reconciliation, something with regards to actuals versus forecasts. That's how visualization in the future is going to take a different step in terms of actually helping us in the enterprise do the work that we do. And ServiceNow is obviously what we very much push for is that user experience layer for visualization.
Can I step in for a little bit? So I want to give Amir a little bit of credit on how he designed his tool. One of the things that was amazing is I've been around the close for a long time, and I've dealt with a variety of systems that show it. And how many of us have, closed checklists that include things like check this system or close this system or run this report or whatever else, to actually in Amir, in the ServiceNow platform that Amir's built, you actually can see that. Like that actually comes to life. And so that visualization is visualizing not a system view or a system task, it's actually the task that the humans do and gives you visualization to that. And so actually visualization in this platform is very important, and they visualize something that I haven't seen before. And so seeing that come to life was really impressive when I started working with Amir.
That's great. So now with all these tools that we have spoken so far, we still feel that they are not the real ones which are really transforming the finance functionality. Because these are all tip of the iceberg, whether it's visualization, whether it's RPA, it's probably just making our life easier. Cloud has enabled it to take it to scale and agility. But what would really transform the processes is the cognitive computing, the AI, and the analytics. What we feel is the work that is being done today, say for, like we heard from Ravi's organization. So the type of work that we are seeing today in actually understanding the entire transformational journey and the analytical thinking within the finance function, which is actually going to be, I think, is the transformational piece. So again, we would like to understand that which are the areas where we have seen advanced analytics. Matt, where we have seen advanced analytics being taken up in the consulting space, what are the finance functions that we have seen that this is being taken up in analytics space?
So I'll start with kind of the obvious pieces, and then I'll go to some of the more obscure or possibly mind-bending views of it. I think FP&A and reporting or kind of that business finance space is obvious. I think the more you can leverage, predictive forecasting around for like true, financial forecasting, the better. We've worked with a client, and the first time we ran, predictive modeling, we said, look, we can do your FP&A process in, a couple of hours, and they said, no way. And we did it, we built the model and we did it, and they said, okay, that was good, nice trick, right? Now prove it to me. And we had to go back and run 2 years of history to prove that our model worked, and then we had to run it in parallel for 6 months to prove that it worked and that we were more accurate than what the forecasters were doing. And so that's the sort of challenge it will bring when you start to think about leveraging that sort of thing in it. And if you think about it, that's putting your brand on the line. I understand the reason why you have to do that, but that's a lot of the logic to that. So I think that FP&A space and how to get predictive and how to pull in unstructured data and deal with that unstructured data and how you forecast. I travel a lot. So, one of the first indicator of a delayed plane, Twitter. Twitter predicts it before any of their internal systems know that there's a delay on an airplane. Because people are tweeting, hey, we took off late, hey, we did this. By the time that goes all the way back to the airline systems and all that stuff, and you get your alert on your phone, they've been tweeting about it for 10 minutes. So being able to predict with that type of data, that type of unstructured data, the impact of that, those sorts of things, like that stuff that now we can do that. I think the other piece that we didn't mention that I think is really important is the in-memory computing that's driving a lot of these analytics, because it's changed the speed of the data. And so I think the underlying technology is really important in that. And so as you think about that, you start to get real time. So I think the business analytics and the FP&A space is obvious. I think the more obscure things are like we've used AI to start to predict. We built a collections bot. And the idea was our clients were, they had, I forget what the exact ratios are, but something like 60 customers that were more than 120 days late. They had like 40% of their customers that didn't pay on time. And so we built a bot that said, we're gonna email these clients as soon as they're late by a day. Well, that sounds great, right? You get contacted the first day, all that stuff, great, fantastic, yay. Well, what happens when your biggest customer is Walmart, they're 40% of your revenue, and you're emailing them on day one of them being late, and they're late every time by 2 days because that's their cycle. You don't want to email Walmart. So we used machine learning in that environment to start to teach the bot not to send to certain clients as certain things occurred. So we made that bot more intelligent. So there are things like credit, there are things like collections, there are things in the back office that you can absolutely use it for. As we start to think about accruals, why don't we use it for accruals? We all go and we do something to build the logic to build an accrual. Why can't we make that intelligent? Now, that doesn't mean you don't want to build checks into it, because you don't want to just book something based off of that. But that means go through all the effort to build that, use the logic, use the analytics, use the math, use the predictive capabilities, and start to apply that. The last piece I'll say is around some of the capabilities like natural language processing. So when I get my, how many of you play fantasy football or some sort of fantasy game? Okay, it may not resonate then. When you play, you get done with your draft and literally you get a report within an hour of how you did. There's not somebody writing that report. That report was done based off of analytics and a chatbot that has generated the email. So when I get my P&Ls now, it's actually something that's pulled out from our SAP system. It goes in Tableau, visualizes it, and then a bot helps leverage a natural language generation tool to then go write the commentary, and it goes to my FA for a review, so it's not going out unchecked, but it gets reviewed and then it gets sent out to the partners running the practice. That's another AI type of capability that gives you that first shot of analytics to enhance to be able to enhance the processes that you're doing in the FA type of roles.
All right. Jerry, would you like to share some of the AI type of initiatives that are being there in this journey of Intuit, and how, because your products are pretty much, they take a lot of data, and I'm sure there's a lot of learning which is getting in to make it very competitive. So what's your take on that?
Sure. So on the product side, so what we do for our customers is gather what we can learn about you. Say you're a TurboTax customer, say you're a teacher, say you're in San Diego. We can customize the interview for you based on what we know about you from what you've told us, and what we can infer about the other information that's available in public, and tune the interview so that you actually increase confidence as you go through that interview process. That's a simple example that is sort of behind the scenes that actually is the way we use AI to help our customers. Another one is if you're a QuickBooks customer and you have a financing need, we can take your QuickBooks data in the application, match it back to what you have in your bank. This is QuickBooks is being fed by your bank transactions. With your permission, if you have a need, actually lend you money and provide you financing at a competitive rate that we find is of higher value to you, faster processing, and more likely to be approved than traditional financing. So those are just two core pieces of AI for our customers. Now, as a finance guy, for our internal customers, it's just not that easy. And a couple of things we are doing are along the lines of what Matt just described. Think about starting a forecasting process, and you've got years of historical data. The primary, as much as professional FP&A people hate to admit it, the primary driver of any month's actual results is going to be the previous month. So the time series is key, but the seasonality may vary quite a bit across the month or across the months, across the quarter. And so we're trying to use tools like Facebook's Profit, which is open source, feed in historical data, see what the projection would be, use that as a starting point for some of our forecasts, whether it's headcount or maybe transaction volume, things like that. And with that, at least then say, okay, what's different than my historical trend? Am I running new promotions? Am I deciding to go after a new channel? Do I know I'm going to change the primary previous time series a little bit, or am I not? And that can take a whole lot of discussion out of the conversation, actually take a lot of variability, a lot of effort out of the conversation. And as we apply some of those tools and processes at the right level, because the smaller the sample size, the less helpful the forecast is, because there's just simply not enough degrees of freedom to make it better than what the analyst is going to have to do by hand anyway. The more we can actually apply some of those tools. And we've done it with headcount. And I think the headcount forecast that we ran through Profit had a variance of about 1.5, and what the analysts, they're going to kill me later, swore was going to be true, had a variance of 3.5% from Astros.
That's good.
So 3.5 is not bad, 1.5 is way better, and so I voted for the robot on that one, and we can focus on driving new business models or something else.
Right. In fact, we also did, we've shared this example over there, we've taken contract analysis as one of our case studies that we had taken up in AI. So we built the AI tool to read the contracts and made sure that we had the right clauses captured to do the risk profiling of contracts and mark out exceptions, so that we can review contracts much more quickly, because we get a volume of nearly 30,000 contracts a quarter. So it's not easy, because we are not a product company predominantly. So we have to get a lot of non-uniform contracts. So that's a challenge, because unlike our product companies, they may be sending out standardized templates, but we have non-uniform contracts, and those non-uniforms, the standardizations are not so much there. Even if we do want to, it's not so easy as a user department, and then you kind of go through all the modifications, the change requests, the CCRs, basically all those, the main contract, MS amendment. So this takes a lot of time. So even for each customer, if we can, make sure that we automate the process, it helps us take out time, and especially make the exception reports much quickly, which we can do the risk profiling even at the draft contract stage. So that's actually kind of alleviates or minimizes the risk for the company. The next area that we have seen is like in AI is revenue forecasting, because we pretty much do a daily predictability of revenue, but our mandate was even reduce it like to the last 0.1%. So that's pretty tough, but we're doing the forecasting tools to make sure that we understand the dependencies and what are the lags or the usual lags, and like updating, in the consultancy industry, you will understand that the effort updates are not being updated in a project life cycle. So we are not really seeing what should be the billable effort, what is the buffer, or what is the non-billable effort. So those types of known trends from different businesses is what we are trying to capture through machine learning. Another interesting corollary to that, what we are doing is doing the risk profiling of contracts from the effort analysis. Like, suppose you have you submit a bid at, or rather you've submitted a request or a proposal at 10% or maybe 15% profit after tax, but you know that going by the history of those types of contracts, you kind of ended up at a realistic or realized profit of say 4%. So what went wrong? Trying to get those learnings built in back to the model that you right now predicted X X effort. Would this really translate into X effort, or have you really, lowballed the effort at the beginning, and that would lead to an effort overrun at the journey and kind of like reduce the profitability? So those type of risk profiles we are trying to build in the model, early indicators of weaknesses in the contract, red flagging it, so that we can take early actions and not really wait for penalties from the client, or SLA breaches, liquidation penalties. How can we early predict some of these weaknesses? That's a couple of examples that we are doing. Amir, would you like to share some of the examples of AI which have been built in?
Sure, you all covered a lot. I don't know that there's anything left. we tried to solve a mystery that's plagued the enterprise. It's the mystery of why do accountants disappear at the end of every quarter. And we want to be able to leverage AI to, in essence, help deliver that information for us. So for example, we do a lot of things redundantly. That's why we close the books every single month. And yet in those closes, there's information available to us that can help us automate the work that we do. So whether it's entries related to revenue, deferred rent, inventory, those are some of the additional use cases to the hundreds that we just went through that in essence can help us take it further from an AI perspective.
Right. So moving on now, one of the other ones which we have seen in the emerging space is blockchain, right? So blockchain, I understand that the adoptability is still not very high in blockchain because there are various mixed responses, and in specific fields we have seen blockchain being adopted. But with, again, cryptocurrencies being launched and then the supply chain finance, we do see the adoption of blockchain coming in. Matt, again, what are your views in the blockchain space? How have you seen the clients embracing, and any particular fields which that's happening more heavily?
Yeah, so I will say that I am a huge proponent of blockchain, and I will tell you that none of my clients are. So, I don't mean none, but my enthusiasm and excitement for it is every time I talk to a client, I walk out thinking this is probably 5 years down the road, and then I think of something else that could be done with it. And so I think there's a little bit of I'm on the hype high, and the clients are either not there or they've already come down. So I know that. What I think the reason I think that the clients are picking it up is it's hard. It's not easy, and if you think about everything you need, it's difficult. If you think about what it could provide, and I don't mean, I'm gonna separate blockchain from cryptocurrency, so I'll just take crypto off the table. I'm not a big fan of crypto. Like that's I don't even want to talk about that. I want to talk about the underlying technology of blockchain itself. That I think it's really great. I mean, think about intercompany. If you want to, why do we have issues with intercompany? Because something's happened. I've got a client that literally has solved intercompany all the way from input all the way up, and they still have massive amounts of reconciliation they have to do to figure out intercompany. And that means that something's happening at the base level where it's not being put input correctly. And so if you think about something like blockchain, it can solve that. If you think about, because you agreed to that ahead of time, the hard part about it is that you have to get consortiums. For it to be valuable, you have to see it all the way through the value chain, and you have to have multiple companies on that. So how do you start to talk about how do I get a consortium of people that are going to agree to do it, that are then going, like, that's hard, right? And it's really hard for my firm with independence concerns, right? Because we're also auditors, so we can't, like, it's even hard for us to impact that. So we're trying to figure out the right partners to work with to do that. So I actually think blockchain is a huge opportunity. I think it will clean up a lot of the mess and create really great visibility, from end to end. I always use this example, like, wouldn't it be great if I'm a computer company and I know where the product came from, where it was sourced, I know who it was sold to through the channel, so I know it went to Best Buy and then it got sold to Carter Soderbergh, who's my son, and I know when he takes it back in to go get something fixed on the computer. Wouldn't that be great to know? Right now, those are all individual systems that have to be negotiated and agreed upon to get any visibility up and down that value chain. So that's really hard. And take that to any example. I just always use it because my son just bought a computer and had to take it in, so I use that. But think of anything that's kind of asset driven. So if you ask me who's really focused on it right now, it's the high asset companies. It's oil and gas is really focused on it. I think that banks are focused on it almost out of fear as much as anything else. And then I think the companies that I've seen most recently are the companies that you don't think of as high assets, but it's like the food product type companies that are trying to track that chain because of so many changes of ownership through the chain. So those are the other ones that I've seen that are starting to really explore with it. What I would say is companies have experimented with it a lot, proof of concepts, proof of value. Nobody said, wow, because when they do that proof of value, it's kind of minimal. It's really small in scope. And I don't think the payoff to blockchain is really small in scope. And that's why I think it's hard. So I think I always equate it kind of to RFID. I think somebody's going to have to say, look, we're going all in on this, and for you to work with us, you're going to have to get on the chain, which is what Walmart did with RFID. I think somebody's going to have to do that with a blockchain idea for it to take off. And I think when it does, then there will be some momentum. But that's really hard, really tough. And so, And I don't think that's the biggest priority for people right now in trying to solve it. Just quite honestly, I think they feel like there's enough to solve inside their four walls without going outside.
Interestingly, in one of the other forums, I heard another case study on blockchain, which is interesting to the finance community because in the AP vendor panelment process, the entire supply chain and AP vendor panelment process, blockchain has been utilized to make sure that vendor check balance, like the background check, has been enabled through blockchain. Particularly when you have a global operation, you could have like the background checks done much easily if they are part of the consortium and they are already in that, in the dispute process. So that could be one of the potentials, and also supply chain finance when you have again global operations to track exactly where the lags are, where the delays are. So blockchain is being utilized by some of the large companies in their AP and supply chain processes. Jerry, would you like to share any of the experiences that you've heard blockchain being utilized in the finance process?
This is not a priority for us within finance, although we do think it may be interesting within the realm of QuickBooks, so I'll just leave it there.
Amir, what's your take on that, on blockchain?
We too are, I guess, Missourians. I like to just learn from Matt in terms of the use cases. Where it can be useful is, again, this whole notion, as Matt mentioned, in the world of AP and being able to track. But it's the same right now with ServiceNow, especially in our finance products. It's not a focus area just quite yet.
Right. So what now, is interesting to think is that while we've spoken about the digital transformation, how different is it for established businesses and for the newly formed businesses? Is it equally easy? It's not, right? So, the established businesses have their legacy systems, their processes, people, mindsets, so many things to deal with to adopt a process. Now, Matt, again, how have you seen that, spanning across your clients, because you have a basket of clients both from established businesses as well as new age startups and, agile businesses. So what's kind of the acceptability of digital transformation in finance?
I think digital finance for kind of all size companies is relevant. I will say that the big companies are willing to invest in it, but it's really hard because they've got multiple systems, they've got all of that stuff. That's actually how, like, working with Amir on some of the ServiceNow stuff, I think that's a great opportunity around for that use case. So I think that the big companies are willing to invest. I think it's really hard. I think the companies that actually can really do it, and we've published kind of this ideal state of, we call it Finance 2025. I think the first people to get to our ideal state of 2025 won't be the $50 million companies. I think it'll be the 1 to 10 type companies that will get there, maybe even some of the younger startups, but it's the ones that are going to say, look, we're big enough that we need to invest in it, but by the way, we're not complex enough yet to say we have to go solve it. And I've just been listening to Jerry's stories, I think what Jerry's doing sounds really impressive, and I think that's fantastic. So, I think I agree. I think some of the smaller companies have more of an opportunity because they're not as big and they're not as complex. And so if they create that vision now, they can actually move the needle much faster, much cheaper, much more effectively than once you're, $50 to $100 million conglomerate that's got, 27 ERP systems across multiple platforms with consolidation tools on tops and acquisitions. Yeah, exactly right. And that complexity kind of grows with all that. So I think those companies are going to be really challenged to do that. And I think there are ways to do it that are specific and unique to them. But I think to really get to that 2025 vision that we've kind of written about, I think that's going to be some of the smaller companies that aren't dealing with some of the same overhead, for lack of historical overhead that we've talked about.
So Jerry, how have you seen, dealing with mindsets, because, you've been through this transformational journey and, so I'm sure it's been like you have different experiences over the years on where you've hit roadblocks or where it's been easy. So if you could share some experiences on those.
It's never been easy. It's hard. So for a company to disrupt itself and replace a working business model with a new one is a trick, right? And there's books written about it, and we think that's exactly what we're trying to do all the time. Because if we don't disrupt ourselves, somebody's going to disrupt us. So when it comes to finance and the structures that you build to actually successfully close the books, report, file with the SEC, all of that with a certain business model, and a new business model comes on, you need to either straddle 27 different ERP and billing systems, which we've had, or just continue to force investment to consolidate and converge, which we do. But you know, where we've gotten to is really the realization that the information that's captured or captive in some of the legacy systems, combined with the information that's flowing into the newer systems, the combination of them is gold. And that's how we can serve our customers better. That's how we can work better as finance people. And so if as we unlock that information, the business case becomes self-evident, and so that we've got some self-sustaining momentum, not just across the finance data, but also across the customer data. And so we're trying to do it across all the platforms, and it is no mean trick. That is, in fact, what we're investing in. I don't think it's going to be a short journey. This is going to take us a while. But you know, when the finance team sees, oh, if I have this, and I have this, and I have this together, and I can stitch it in government and make sure that the elements from the various data sources are clean and reportable, I've now really unlocked some insights that'll help me drive the business faster, further, understand it better, help make better investments. I mean, that's what we're all about. And so that's the promise of actually going through the process.
Right. And Amir, how have you seen the pitches with established businesses when you're, pitching for the same product to established businesses with all sort of complexities and vis-a-vis? Like, you've seen the difference, right? Like, must be like there's been a huge difference.
Absolutely. There's a very broad spectrum, and what happens is the larger the organization, the slower their velocity or their desire to change, and yet they're the ones that have the biggest need for change. And that's obviously where ServiceNow has a lot of its core offerings in the sense that we drive those transformations. It's a little bit of what Matt said. It's going to be somewhere along that spectrum of what Matt described, because it's going to be a perfect balance of companies that have the ability to drive change in their organization, that can actually leverage new solutions, don't have the tech debt, because at the end of the day, we just don't have an unlimited purse to invest in every single solution that's out there. And so you have to be able to articulate, especially in the field of finance, as to why you would make an asset allocation, why you would invest in one asset versus another, and terms of the returns you're going to get. So that is how, again, we see it kind of playing along in terms of the future.
Right. So, that leaves us with the last thought of the day, that we are saying that is it only a finance transformation that we are seeing which would be successful? What about our people? What about the impact on the organization? How do we motivate the people that this is the right thing? And, we all play, we as finance professionals have a very, very leading role to play in that, because we can impress upon them that how valuable our teams are, and how do we make sure that any transformation is only going to add value to the organization and to the people that we have. What are your thoughts on that, Matt?
I'll probably meander around this one a little bit, because I think talent's the biggest question I get right now is around talent, and it's a little bit less around the value and a little bit more about the transformation that has to occur in the skill sets of the individuals to continue to be valuable. And so, as you think about that conversation I started with where you've got a lot of back office processing, and some of those resources need to transition to kind of helping the front office with data, like that's a pretty massive skill set difference. And not everybody's going to make that transition. And so what happens is, one of my colleagues talks about it really well. You've got this technology that improves, and usually your talent lags behind that. And then you'll train up your talent will actually move ahead of that technology, and they'll start to expect more. And you go through this unleveled, where they kind of pass each other in the night over time. And it's a conundrum that we all face, because we're going to have to build more skill sets. If you look at a finance organization, 10 years ago it was CPAs and MBAs, right? Now you need data scientists. You mentioned that you had you'd set your group up and you're working very closely with your data science team. Like, data scientists in finance and accounting, like accountants would have said that's a sin, like that's crazy. And we're actually on campuses now working with accounting departments to say you need to build some data science knowledge into your curriculum, so that your CPAs are coming out with data science knowledge. Like those are the sorts of things that we're trying to work with our campuses on to bring the right talent into the system, because quite honestly, if you're just a CPA now, it's not enough. You know, think about the AP processor that's been your top, you know, managing AP, you know, your AP manager that's the superstar, and now he or she, instead of managing, you know, 100, you know, data inputters, it's now five seniors and 30 bots. That's a different skill set. It's just a different skill set in how to do that. And so that evolution, even in the back office, is very, very different. And I equate it to the skill set differences in manufacturing. If you looked at people working on a line 100 years ago, they were sitting on a line turning the screws, and they were great at it. But that's a different skill than what exists in the manufacturing plants that are coming back and being built today in the US. And that's because it's moved to different locations, and now it's come back on shore, and what's coming back on shore is highly automated. And so you've now got engineers, you've got a different skill set of people in there working than you did 100 years ago. And I think that's what we're going to see in finance over the next, and I think we've already seen it, by the way. I think it will continue to evolve, you know, even more holistically as we go forward. You know, it's always interesting if you put up a Google FP&A job requirement and compare that to somebody I was talking to an auto company on Tuesday, and you look at an auto company request for an FA, night and day. And by the way, I would never go work for the auto company based off of that job description, right? And so if you look at, you know, kind of that difference, it's night and day. And you know, I don't know that Google's all the way there. They're just kind of one of the examples we pulled up. But that requirement of an FA for a tech native is much different than some of these non-tech natives that are trying to figure this out right now. And so I think there is a huge talent gap, and I think it's not I have to go buy it, or I have to go procure it in some way. And I don't think it's just, oh, then we have to go build it. I think it's some combination of those. And finding out what that right balance is for you is going to be unique to every single company because of the talent you have in the door. The talent that people have in the Bay Area in a finance organization is different than in Detroit.
Right. And Jerry, how have you seen, you know, grappling with this talent challenge that we have today in every organization, and how have you seen from your organization?
Well, so business systems analysts and people with the ability to understand and help work with data architecture and find their way through the various source systems, that's becoming more and more of a skill set that's required. When I joined the company, there was a small core set of folks, mostly in the IT organization, that had those skills. Now, if I think about, you know, what we would call FP&A inside, or people who report to FP&A leaders, let me put it that way, inside the company. So if that's 150 people who report to FP&A leaders, maybe 30 are data folks. And that's actually a pretty big change. They're hard to find. And so one of the conversations that we've been having, because we live right around the corner from the people with the resume that you just popped up, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is the combination of business acumen and data skills. Do you start with business acumen and some proclivity for data and build up the data skills, or do you start with somebody with data skills and try to get the business acumen? And is it something in between, or does it vary? And I think we're going to have to do both, and there's a whole lot of training that's going to have to happen on our side as well. Just as an aside, we've got an offsite for my team next week, and one of the things that's come across is a data capability survey that we're all meant to take, including me, to just assess where you stand relative to some core skills and capabilities around data. And there are going to be some folks on the team that are just, they crush it, and me, who will not. But you need to know what it is that you're after.
Let's just point off.
Yeah, so
Am I going to get a resume?
So yeah, with this we kind of would like to invite the questions from the audience. I hope you really enjoyed the discussion from the panelists. And Matthew, would you like to take some questions? Thank you.
I'm just going on this side, so if you can share.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So
Jerry, I use Mint every month. I go to Mint and I pull the numbers and I plug it into Excel and just get the budget. What is Intuit doing in terms of making that easier for me as a consumer, not as a business?
That's the feature request.
So the good news is you're getting your transactions automatically loaded into Mint. You understand where you stand across all your different bank accounts. You've got aggregation across bank accounts, credit cards, investment accounts, your home, your car, every asset you can think of with valuations updated while you sleep, which you don't have in Excel. Okay, so then if you need to say, my budget over the next 5 years is going to be X, and so I need to put my transactions in to put a little more personal English on that, then that's where we are today. We are building out budgeting capability and continue to invest there. The core value for Mint is understanding where you stand. There is some planning and some tracking that's there as well. Frankly, most people just want to know where they stand, and the planning and budgeting is important. But first is, did we get your expenses in? Are they accurate? Are they categorized well? Is the latency of the offering what it needs to be?
Thank you.
We'll keep working on it.
Yep.
Good.
So my question is with respect to talent. So now when you talk about your expertise in business and trying to train this work in data science, have you guys ever considered forming small teams of people who work a combination of experts in data science and other people in business and working together? Because as I look at healthcare, we have things like robotic arms. None of the schools teach about robotic arms. But now we bring together people in science and technology together to solve those problems. So how would that work in financial industry?
So I talked about a small business intelligence team on my team, and we've just formed also a center of expertise for data across finance. What we had found was that each of our finance sort of sub-organizations in the CFO realm had invested to solve their particular problems around data, and that's the right thing to do. Those problems were specific to their particular outcomes that they were trying to drive. But then we take a step back. Were we solving what was most important across the company from a finance function perspective? And did we have the right skills really to make as much progress as possible? So we're doing what you said, embedding an organization with data skills with the more traditional sort of finance org to help make sure that the combination of business strategy, understanding what the drivers are, with the data folks who know where to go find the information, they've developed some expertise around the subject matter themselves, they can actually work together to drive faster progress. That's just a kernel that we need to continue to build out and grow, but that's how we're approaching it anyway.
I think I agree 100%. That's what we usually recommend to our clients. There may be a time in the distant future where that sort of knowledge is democratized and everybody has it. But I always use this, when we started to work in RPA years ago, we started off saying we want to train everybody so that they have it in their toolkit. And the first couple projects were disasters because nobody was really deep enough to be an expert at it. And what we needed was somebody who was really deep, an architect type, and we needed the business process together. So until everybody's an expert and everybody knows it and it's second nature to everybody, having that center of excellence to be able to do that, it makes up, that's exactly the route we go. I think that may evolve over time as some of that starts to evolve and that sort of stuff. But I don't want to say we're in the early days because we're probably past the very early days, but we're still early in it. And to Jerry's point, the talent's not there. Like if you tried to say let's staff an entire organization with data scientists, you're not going to go find it. It's just too competitive. There are not enough of them. And by the way, that's like what I'm telling my kids to go major in. But I think that's huge.
Sorry. Hey guys, I'm Donald. Wanted you guys to take a quick stab at describing what the finance system of the future is going to look like. Right. So if I'm a cloud native company and I'm now doing 100 million in turnover, what does a cloud native finance system look like? Is it just ERP in the cloud? Or is it a whole series of subsystems that are all contributing to a data lake, with RPAs, moving things around? What is the architecture of that kind of system look like?
So I'll take a first shot, and then I hand it over to some of my colleagues. I think they have opinions as well. But to me, that system of the future, I don't know how much of it will matter. Like, we all have to deal in the data in the systems right now, because I've got data over here in one system, data over here in another system, data over here in another system, and it takes forever for that to flow. So I think with the speed of data and kind of that in-memory computing and putting it in the cloud and that sort of stuff, I think that data is now going to be readily available. The question now is, how do I change my processes to use it, and how do I interact with that? And I think that's where, like, I've been impressed with ServiceNow and how that changes the interaction with those systems. Like quite honestly, if my data is there, if I open up Mint and I get what I need, like, I don't care how Mint works underneath there, right? Like, what do I really care? Like, I don't care, it's there, right? I care when I have problems with it and I don't understand what's happening, and I think that's going to get cleaned up. So I think it may be different a little bit for every company because some of them have that tech debt, but I do think that the way that you need to interact with the systems in the future needs to be much more holistic and kind of single touch, not across multiple systems, not worrying about, well, it came in through this system, then it moved to this system, and then, by the way, now it moved to a data lake. Like, I think we all have to know that today, because it's not fixed. But I think as I think about the nirvana future, that's where it starts to be. And I think that's very hard. So I'm not saying, I don't want to minimize what it takes to get there, but I think if you really ask me what that future should look like, that's what it should look like.
I'll definitely chime in. It should be a connected platform. It shouldn't be so much data centric as it is today. Don't worry about where the data is flowing. Let the employees, let the workers that are going to come out, especially the next generation, let them do their work the way that they naturally would, and then let services, or let companies like ServiceNow and others, let them take care of that flow of information. There's data today, whether it's at Intuit or ServiceNow, that resides in AP and AR, or revenue systems. They are data in our financial statements. And yet we're toggling between all these other functions. You should just have a connected platform, a single place, do your work the way you naturally would, and then let us, or let an organization, in essence, I'd say let it maneuver that data to where it needs to go, because that's where we're wasting our time today. Right? I'd rather go home and see my kids play soccer, not just sit there and key in more numbers into a file versus another, no matter how many people I hire. But that's going to be one of the biggest benefits in terms of how systems can do that. That's how we see that connected platform for what we do. And it has to have workflow. In the enterprise, you have to have workflow. Not in the consumer world, right? Nobody approves my Amazon orders at home. But at work, everything needs an approval, and so that workflow engine has got to be critical in the future. That's missing.
Should have let Amir
My
start.
Amazon orders get highly scrutinized.
Scrutinize what group they're different. How do you get through?
Amir said it much more elegantly than I did. I should have let him start.
I tackled that. It was perfect.
Thank you. This is going back to the data science portion. So just to clarify, are we talking about just efficiency for the service level agreements with the executive team for the need for data science? Or is it better insight, better that's the first portion of it. And the second portion are just integration of data science into the FP&A function. Are we talking about enhancing the FP&A, just creating a higher level finance professional, or are we talking about just bringing in data science specialists to just maybe one or two, several of these folks to enhance the departments? Just to get your thoughts on that. Sure.
So start with the efficiency. It's about more than efficiency. So I'll just tell you what's happening in this company right now. We had a new CEO take office at the beginning of the calendar year, and the way he is working with his team and the rest of us to run the company is to establish objectives, most of which aren't financial related, but really inputs that are going to drive the right outcomes for the customer, which then lead to the financial results. So if all we had to do was dump the trial balance and run some reports and say, here's how we did at the end of the month, we'd be done. That is not what we're doing. It's what's going on across the company from a customer-back perspective. What are we delivering for customers? How does it compare with what we expected? what are we going to do if it's different than we expected? Maybe it's better, so let's do more. Maybe it's not better, so let's do something different. And then that constant update of then how does that drive our financial outcomes? I mean, the effort around data and just clarity it spans well beyond finance. So we finance are working very integrally with the rest of the technology team, and so all of that has to come together. So that's not about efficiency, that's about operating a company in a way that's consistent and cohesive and understands what the objectives are all the way from top to bottom. So that's just a very current example in our world. On the what does a data scientist or a very skilled data person do on the FP&A side? I mean, two examples. I've got one of the leaders on my team who is working with the technical teams to actually provide visualization for the dashboards that actually report against these input goals that I just talked to. So that's one. How do you make those KPIs clean, consistent, visible, clickable, so that they can be used across the company. I've got another person on my team who happened to have experience in most of our big billing systems, and when we have a need to actually understand the 360-degree view of our customer, he had some secret sauce that can actually help us accelerate on a pain problem that's been existing for years, and he's now in the mix helping actually accelerate progress for that, which is great. So is that an FP&A function? No. Is it great to have somebody with a view and perspective across the company from sort of a central finance perspective that can lean in and help where that help can be most used? Absolutely. And so some things you can't forecast even in Facebook's profit in terms of where the path is going to be, but that sort of investment and those sorts of skills can manifest value all over the place.
Sounds like operations comes in.
Operations and I grew up at HP a long time ago. There's a plan, do, check, act cycle that's sort of endemic, and so there's just all sorts of ways to apply it.
Yeah, so I would love not to worry about what's underneath and why things are moving around and where they're moving around. But I think that with all this new technology, we also probably do worry about transparency as well as security. And in the end, all of this stuff is supposed to reduce the friction that we all thought was, finance. So finance, in some sense, is an intermediary between products and services of some sort. So those three issues, transparency, security, and friction, are things that I want to know how you think these technologies impact implications are.
Say there's friction in the way we've been doing things for the last 20 years. If accounting hasn't changed in 400 years, we still do debits and credits. So look, the real friction is going to be in the sense of how we can drive the future of what we should be doing in accounting. We're asking questions about data scientists because 20 years ago, the data I dealt with in FP&A was 60,000 rows. The data that I'm sure that you're talking about is not 60,000 rows. So that friction is natural, but you have to actually be able to leverage some of the things that Jerry's mentioned in terms of what we do, not just in consumer and enterprise, to be able to reduce that friction that's going to get worse. The trust, the security that you're asking for, the ability when we say to ServiceNow to just do your work, and we will move the data to where it needs to go. Well, there's many different ways for us to address security. We can tell you from either secure protocols or what we do from SOC 1 type reports. There's many different ways for us to get people to overcome the security fears that they have. It's very similar to what we mentioned earlier. Security shouldn't be the main focus. At ServiceNow, we serve a wide range of customers. We can use it for the government, like to believe it's going to be safe for you, better safe for some of the folks in the street. So that's how we kind of get around it. Have you as being the real reason as to how we eliminate that friction?
Can I add? So rules and permissions and access, I mean, those have to be controlled and understood. You have to know who's in your systems, who's not, why, what's the role, what's the reason for being there. So that's in the systems to affect the data. That must be true. Then what you choose to share is then a business conversation. Ideally, finance can be the friction or oil, lubricant to actually make things go faster. I would hate for a system or the ability to pull data together to be the inhibitor, to keep me from being able to share something that's actually got value to be shared. So you want the what do we share for what reason to be a business decision. Here's what I want everybody to see so they actually understand what's going on so they can make better decisions faster. I mean, that's the conversation you want to have now. That doesn't mean that everybody gets to see the financial results before they're made public. Therefore, you've got all sorts of other potential problems, but that's actually a minority of the information that we're talking about. It's really what are the right business drivers, value drivers, and how are those doing? But you do need to be quite careful of what's going where for sure.
I agree with everything. I think when I said, we shouldn't worry about what's underneath, I don't mean that nobody should worry about that, by the way. Somebody needs to think about that, so I'll say that.
It's an industry, actually.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Same thing with security. Like, I think people should worry about security and they should check that security. So I am on board with the fact that you want to try to, minimize risks around that. I think where I'm going is kind of what these gentlemen have said already, which is like I think of the future of finance of we have lived the way that we close the books for hundreds of years, and our systems that we created 30, 40 years ago mimicked green sheets of paper, right? And then we said, well, we've got different capabilities we have to build. So even if you take apart the ERPs, they still have modules and data has to flow between those. And so there's been latency that has been created amongst all of that. And for the first time, I feel like we've overcome those, right? We have the ability now to overcome those. Now, is anybody actually perfect? Probably not. Like, I can't say, here's the one company that's perfect, right? So I'm not saying that we're all the way there, but for the first time I see technology that can actually alleviate some of that historical issue, some of those historical issues, the data latency, that sort of stuff, so that data flows real time, that now you've got access to that. And think about what that means. Like, think about what that means to your processes. Why do you close your books on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis? Because it's a real pain in the ass to get all that data flown through all those systems, all the accruals booked, all the analysis that you have to do to check and validate all that. It's a real pain. So we say, look, we're only going to do it once a month if it's easier. We're going to do it once a quarter if it's really hard. And that's why we do it. Think of that data if it's real time and like you're checking those accounts real time, or you're checking those accounts daily to say, hey, I'm going to manage some accounts. Let me go double check those. Now you've got that effort going through the month instead of being peaked at the end of the period, right? And so we can start to rethink how the work is done with some of these new technologies that didn't exist 5 years ago, and for sure didn't exist 20 years ago or 30 years ago when some of these ERPs were originally built.
Go ahead. My name is Paul Boyle. I'm with a company called Earth Computing. We're a startup. So I'm a technocrat, so I'm interested in how we can solve some of your problems using technology. You referred to some of the talent shortages and data scientists and some of the other companies indirectly refer to that. And I'm seeing this across the entire industry, the shortage of people, the error-prone nature of human interaction with machines. And so the question I have for you is, if you could ask the technologists in the room, by the way, a genius of which it's this right there, that gentleman that's called Ted Selker, is one of the luminaries in the industry if you didn't know who he was. He just asked the last question. If you could give us some guidance on what you'd like to see in terms of architecture and technology to solve those problems. And I could give you 3 wishes. How does that?
So here are my wishes, and I'm not going to take it from an architecture perspective. I'm going to take it from a business user perspective, right? So I want the ability to receive an invoice or to make a payment and have it flow all the way through without a touch. And I want the intelligence built in to understand why there are issues and to make that touchless. I want the ability to look at my close, and I want to close in real time. Not because I want it to cost them a bunch of money to get there. Why in the hell does it take us forever to close books? Right? Shouldn't. And the accountants are going to argue with me and say that they understand why, but it really shouldn't, right? So I think there's that. And I think I want to be able to use that data that I just talked about, having access to real time, and create meaningful forecasts that we can make business decisions off of. Those would be my 3 asks.
Anyone else on the panel?
So the forecasts are a part of it, but also the FP&A is very simple. What the hell just happened? Why did it happen? What's going to happen next? And for extra points, where am I invested and what do I expect to get for it? I mean, those are really simple questions to ask. Huge pain in the rear end to try to answer consistently. The issue that we've got is the data is disparate, and you can't get all the value out of it unless it's collected and ordered in a way that it's accessible, consistent, and you can actually draw inference from it without all the data skills that we can't find in the market today. Should we get those data skills in-house? Of course. Should we train ourselves? Of course. What I would wish for would be a ready Library of Congress for all the information flowing across my organization, so I know exactly what's where, I know what it means, I can pull it and research and prognosticate to my heart's content.
We've got just a couple more questions.
So I think we have been seeing a lot of examples of the AI initiatives starting as prototypes or proof of concepts, or proof of value as we call it these days. But many of these experiments, do not go into the production stage because the top management is not really convinced about the value of the output or the outcome. So based on your experience, can you please share some examples of how the real value was demonstrated from a business perspective for those AI initiatives?
Like when we went for a contract analysis case study, what we did is we took top 10 customers with large volume of documents, and we showed them that if we had done a risk profiling, first of all, the anticipated reduction in the review time, and if we could review those in the draft contract stage, like when the legal is reviewing, we get the contracts, we could highlight the critical risks, because in a manual scenario, everything may not get highlighted to that volume, and there can always be a risk that you get a signed contract and then you start identifying those risks. At that time, it's too late in the day, right? So in the draft stage, if you can elevate those risks, highlight, flag it off, then say, if you say, for example, you have a small client and you have signed up for a huge limitation of liability. So that could potentially be a big risk, but in the eventuality, if you could flag it earlier, then the decision may be not to take that, because you may not really take up that contract itself just for and sign up such a huge limitation of liability. This is just one of the examples. So you draw up some of those examples of the past, what you could have probably avoided or what you can avoid, and build the value proposition. It is not only about the saving of FTEs, it is the saving from the larger saving basically. Or example, I'll tell you another example, which is a very real life case. You have in the contracts, and which could be true for consulting firms also, you have billable expenses to the client, right? You incur expenses and you can bill it to the client on some of the cases. Many of those contracts, if it is at the discretion of the managers, project managers, if they have billed it or not billed it. Now that could be a leakage in revenue, right? So if they have not billed it, you just base it on, because of the sheer volumes, you may sometimes base it on what they are billing is only billable. But just going through because the contracts could be in different forms. It could be built on actuals, built on approvals, built on, some fixed amounts which could be billed. So various things. And your systems may not be so geared to have so many customizations for such volumes. Because the complexity comes when we are talking about 40,000 invoices a quarter, or rather a month. We have 40,000 invoices a month which we are generating. In that, we have to see these intricacies. In such a case, if you could flag it initially itself, when the contract is coming in, you ask with the machine learning example, you flag it at that stage. So when the project manager is not billing a case, you immediately highlight exceptions and build that report that these are the mixed revenues, and you have to seek an explanation even before the close. This is just an example.
We do include it in our solutions in terms of what the spectrum of intelligence is. We measure it in terms of, very simply, just throughput and risk. Can we give you a faster close? Can we give you just the simple ability to deliver information faster, make faster decisions? And we measure that with risk, because in reality, you can get an accounts payable team to process invoices extremely quickly. The risk that they make a high amount of errors is what causes them to slow down. So what we do though, is that this spectrum of intelligence that we incorporate in our products today, which we do, we measure those values in terms of the outcomes of how we can measure against just throughput and risk. You can quantify that obviously, but it's just not the sole goal.
Yeah, the only, I'll add two quick thoughts. One is, building business cases and tracking to those has always been really difficult, because especially in big IT system implementations in companies, because it's 18 months later, and are you really going to go back and track that? And by the way, your business has changed, and how do you baseline and those sorts of things. So what I've seen with these some of the new digital technologies is, in the agile method that you can do, you actually can see the value faster and measure that. So I like the idea of kind of build a business case, be agile about it, test it. If you're not going to reach that business case, stop doing the work or adjust, and then track to the business case. So I'm a big believer in get the business case, track to it, and measure it at the end, because these things aren't going to take you 18 months to solve. You're solving individual issues that are actually something that can be self-contained and you can measure. So I think that's really important. The other thing you mentioned was, executives say, I don't want this. What I've seen in most of my clients is the executives actually aren't necessarily against any of this, right? They're not saying, no, I don't want this, I don't want that, I don't want this. It's middle management that becomes the roadblock. The staff or kind of the newer employees are really excited about it. They're trying to, they see this as a huge opportunity for them, and the execs want the results. Right? The execs don't really care that much. They probably care about some of the things we talk about around security and, that sort of stuff. But they're not going to say, hey, don't go do that for this reason. They do want to see that business case. It's that middle management that will start to pressure test, and they're like, well, if I have to manage that, I don't know what that looks like. And so I see that middle management being the barrier right now to some of this digital transformation. Not the execs who are a lot more focused on results, or the staff, or the newer team members that are really excited about it. I see it being that middle level of management that gets frustrated and tries to pressure test it and ends up squelching it.
Thank you.
Hi. Just to be a quick question. My name is Alok Guha. I work with a startup in the cloud native space. So my question is back to the original topic, which is digitally powered transformation for businesses that are going through this. So my question is primarily to Jerry, but I'd welcome feedback from the others as well on the panel. So if you look at what we talked about, we started from use of cloud, SaaS, RPA, lack of talent, and so on and so forth. When you're going through digital transformation, as you look at it, what has been the biggest challenges to get there? I mean, if you're looking at it, I heard everything from getting a real-time close.
The metaphor for changing the wheels on the car while you're running the race, I hate that metaphor, but that's the hardest thing to do, because we talk about legacy customers. Legacy customers are a blessing because they're the ones who are providing the investment, the dollars for the investments that you can make. So you can't leave them in the ditch. You can't crater your performance if you're a public company for quarters at a time while you make the investment. And so the biggest thing is to try to move investment and attention from the old to the new gracefully, and then keep the people who must be very good at the old and they need to execute very well, keep them motivated, even though they may not be on the new and sexy. All the attention is going to go to the new and sexy. The old and valuable needs to be maintained. And so I wouldn't say that we do a great job of that, but what we do try to do is make sure that when we're talking about goals, when we're talking about rewards, when we're talking about recognition, we're also talking about operational excellence and delivery of the core foundational aspects of the business, and not just the newest, coolest stuff. We'll talk about the new and coolest well because everybody loves to see it, but you can't ignore the foundational. So that, from a people management point of view, I would say that's the biggest challenge. Nobody wants to be in the lower left quadrant of the BCG graph, right? But if you leave it behind, you've left a ton of value on the table, so you must continue to run those businesses well, and deliver for customers well, and treat those employees well, and that's something you gotta make sure you're always on top of.
What about the process then?
So the process, the expectation from leadership is that everything happens seamlessly and easily and error-free, and there's really no fuss behind the curtain. Anybody who's worked in finance or operations know there's an awful lot of fuss behind the curtain, no matter what platform you're on or how current some of the stack is. And so from a process perspective, that takes everything you would think about from a startup perspective. Even if you're running a legacy system, you need to be creative, inventive, persistent, diligent. You have to think, how do you keep this thing running while you're migrating either toward a new process, a new platform? There's not one answer, because there's never just one system. And when you move from we moved our legacy business from an old version of an ERP to a newer version of that same vendor's ERP. That was one of the hardest things we ever did. That was horrible. So now imagine moving that to something completely different that's really architected for the cloud instead of desktop. It's just knowing that it's going to be not a whole hell of a lot of fun, get your best people on it, and again, keep them excited and motivated about doing a great job.
Next question
That's a
over
question.
here. So we've got this one and then you'll go back. Thank you.
Thank you for a fantastic discussion. My name is Geeta and I'm here representing the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. So my question to you was around talent. There was a lot of discussion today about data science and the centrality of that and the importance of that going forward. What would you then advise finance professionals that perhaps aren't, like you said, tech natives? How would one train up to make data science more a part of one's thinking, of one's training? How would we do that? How would we move towards democratization?
It's a good question. What I don't think you have to train everybody on are the 14 or 21 or somebody else will know the right number of algorithms that go into machine learning, right? What you need to do is teach them a couple of things. One, how do you consume the data and how do you get comfortable with the data? And what does that mean? You have to understand the inputs and you have to understand the outputs. You have to understand how to tell a story around that. That is meaningful. And so I think that's, if I think of 101, that's 101. And then I think it progressively gets more complex to where you get to the other end, which is they become data scientists. And that's where they are knowledgeable about how and when to use the different algorithms that are out there, or even building new algorithms and that sort of stuff. So I think I don't think everybody has to go become a data scientist tomorrow. I think they do have to understand how to use the output and what that means, and to understand it and to work with it. And I think we had talked about, like, there's kind of business and data scientists together. Those business people have to understand what the data science is doing. They have to tell that story. And the problem is, not everybody's going to be there to build it, so they have to know how to pick something up, how to learn from it. It's like inheriting the macro. You inherit a macro at work, and you're like, I don't know what that macro does, but I'm going to keep running it, right? Well, you can't do that, right? You have to understand what that data science is doing and be able to understand what that is. Doesn't mean you have to understand all the nuances of it, but you have to understand what's being used, why, and how.
Right, thank you. And Shivali, did you have anything to add to that? Because, sorry, you were saying, you were talking about skilling up and an offsite.
I mean, what's remarkable to me is how natural it comes to some of the early career folks, whether they're sort of branded data science or financial analysts, classic financial analysts. Just the experience of growing up with your hands-on technology from the beginning. And I know I'm going to sound like an old guy, but you guys know the iPhone was invented in 2007. That's not that long ago. It seems like forever ago. You can't imagine life without it. Facebook, 2007. I mean, it's just crazy how much things have changed in just the last little bit over a decade. And if you think about going through high school, college today, or starting 5 years ago relative to when I went back, when I was going to school, the requirement to be dealing with, manipulating, assessing data, and just all the time is just part of life. And so unleashing that, so somebody in my position needs to recognize that there's a whole lot of skill out there in the first place, and let it run. The other thing is the analog, as Matt was saying, when I was in business school, the advice was take statistics, take operations classes, so you know what those people are doing, so when they try to sell you something, you can say, no, that's BS. Take the next course, then maybe you can do a little bit more than that. And today, I think the analog is make sure you're taking enough math to understand what's going on behind the scenes with the data manipulation, the data science, the data architecture, at least enough to do the projections, the forecasting, understand what's going on, and if you like it, keep going, because that combination of business acumen and data capabilities is just going to be huge.
So just to add on here, Geeta, one more point which we have seen, it's also very important for us to understand the different capabilities or even get a sense of how, say, an NLP works and all. Like I personally did a kind of a summer course of how an NLP works before we went on with this case study. You can actually evaluate even the vendor products better. You can ask the right set of questions because everything seems extremely rosy and it's absolutely meeting the requirement. But you can get deeper within, say, 5 solutions. Is it really a screen scraping tool, or is it really going deep dive? What sort of AI is it? I think that sort of from a user perspective, it's important. From a finance perspective, they know they really can't just sell you something and go, because we ask a lot of questions, as to what happens and how much time do you take to train a new contract. Can you show us real time right here? We'll give you a contract, not a canned contract. So there are different ways where you can actually ask better questions, more equipped if you kind of deal with it more. Even I don't know any of the algorithms myself, but kind of trying to understand.
I do want to tap onto what Jerry said one second, which is if we can change the curriculum for what we actually teach chartered accountants and CPAs to better understand data, that by itself I think would be big, because to your point, Geeta, we today still, if you ask a CPA what they're learning, they're still learning debits left credits right. If we can change that, then you'll morph into what Jerry even described for what Intuit does, this balance of what a very true kind of core finance person is with data science capabilities.
Thank you. Last question
Last
right
question.
over here. Great, I get to close it out.
We've talked a lot about talent perspective from the skills that people bring in and what universities have. I'm with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and the one thing in our firm that we talk a lot about, right, and we have a process and a culture of, is citizen-led innovation. Some of our best and brightest ideas come from the younger associates who have joined us from all across the firm, right, all across 200,000 people. But there needs to be a culture, and oftentimes when I'm talking to clients, that's one of the biggest topics that comes up, is there needs to be a culture of acceptance of adopting the citizen-led innovation and allowing your talents to thrive, especially if you're a larger organization. And that acceptance needs to pretty much come from the board level. How have you guys seen some of that in your own organizations? And with a startup mentality, it is a little bit easier, but how have you harnessed some of the more citizen-led innovation in your own companies?
Well, I would say we literally built a product. I'm a controller, I'm not a product person. So we at ServiceNow built a product. I built it with another gentleman who knows really well. It's that type of culture that naturally has to exist, because if you think about all the different concepts, the innovator's dilemma that exists, you can either naturally follow what a customer is going to tell you or do what we did. I'm a controller, I built a product, we led to the finance business unit. If you know what ServiceNow is, you would not expect to see finance and ServiceNow sitting next to each other in terms of the titles of what we described. It has to be, like you said, the culture of the organization. We just thrive. We look at the way we change work, and it goes back to a lot of organizations. They don't have a good understanding as to what their why is. And what do they really exist for? What are they trying to do? We make it very simple. We want to make the world of work better for people. Now we go do that for every single person. We don't care who or what function you reside in.
Yep, so at Intuit, we've got an expectation that everybody's innovating and everybody understands what the company was founded on, so customer-driven innovation and design for delight. We talk about Scott Cook inventing Quicken after watching his wife pay checks at the kitchen table, and we've got the kitchen table in the building across the street. So I mean, it's constantly reinforced. Everybody is meant to allow their teams about 10% white space time so they can think about how to apply themselves in ways that aren't part of their normal job and think about ways to do things differently. Sometimes that results in a brand new product. Most times it results in a way of doing things differently. I think we could go further. If you're not careful enough with people like me, you say, we can't do that because I got to do this, this, and this. But even if that's true 8 of the 10 times, the two could be gold. And one of my young team members is in the corner. And so don't lose heart even if I say, no, you can't do that. Let's keep trying, because the real question is, why the hell do you want me to do that?
And if you do come across people who are more risk averse and are hesitant to kind of adopt these things for, you know.
I think the other thing that I've seen, we've done a lot at Deloitte, but one of the things I've seen from my clients that's really good is the executives have created kind of a Shark Tank environment where they give access to the younger team members and say, look, I'm going to give 2 hours every Friday, and we're going to come do pitches, and you come in and do a pitch. And the controller that I was mentioning in Detroit that I've been working with, that's what he does. He'll bring somebody in, and he has 2 hours every Friday, and it essentially overcomes that gap that I was talking about where middle management squelches the idea. You can come in with any idea. Not everything's accepted, but one, he gets to know his team. 2, the team feels like they've been heard by the executives. And 3, he's like, I get much better ideas than I do from any of my direct reports.
Does anyone else do that? That's great. Wow.
Well, first I want to thank the audience for these amazing questions. We would have been here another hour. So thank you all for this great questions. And Gargi, especially to you for driving the whole discussion. I appreciate your being here. And thank you. We lost the show, but thank you, Jerry, for hosting us today at Intuit.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hi, Nagesh. Hi, Geeta. Very nice meeting you. Thanks for coming down. Hi, Nagesh. I mean, recently, in this birthday, so I thought let me post on this.
This was fantastic. Exactly. Yeah. Nilesh was here.
Yeah, I spoke to her for the,
So you're based out of here?
Yes, I'm based out here.
You have to fight around all the time?
Yeah, the revenue. Yeah. So the rest of the what time work I do? So kind of right now I have to go back to work.
one of your directors is a good friend of mine and mentor, Sridhar Iyengar. He's my best friend.
He was, we had a session for him for 2 days and we went through the entire OTR cycle.
In fact, he had been there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, okay. Is it from there? Fantastic. I actually wanted to do that. Where are you doing it? I saw it on the website. Do they need Gmail here? But online, Berkeley needed one. So it was like,
Even Berkeley doesn't.
no, I can't.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not possible.
But as mentioned, as you're going to some, I'm not sure I understand much of
So I actually I work very closely with we actually co-create. We work with them and then
that's the best way.
so what I do,
Get
this
one.
is revenue forecast tool which I work on. We actually create them entire systems for quarter. Yeah, we went there. So that's why I'm very close.
Because they don't understand contracts, right?
We understand contract.
We are under the technology. It's a combination of the user experience.
And then they took that tool to contract. This is actually a tool. Which one? They work with you and we work with you. We co-create a tool. We are just customer. Yeah. And our contracts are so complex. Basically, once we work with you, other things are take off. We were not satisfied at all. For 1 year, you worked out all that work. He said like, they could not reach me. They could not do this. This will work. You have to make it. We were like real, people who were doing real feedback. Yeah. 1 year out of our work. Side by side along the way. So then we
Currently
co-create.
working on the similar project with my colleague in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so.
I don't know what I'm listening to them, but it's like easy to personalize things. So this algorithm runs on mobile, and it will analyze your contract, whatever contract.
So mobile is the second level. First is the processing. It's huge because it's like risk profile level contracts. Our contracts itself is like across industries, right? Across industries, a lot of customization. Yeah. So we